Hello, and welcome to this, the first in a series of programs about shooting great videos with your camcorder. Perhaps you just use a camcorder to record family events and special occasions, such as a wedding or a holiday. Or perhaps you might have taken a next step towards more serious use for creating your own programs on differing subjects and themes. Or perhaps you're now thinking of getting into video for the first time and are looking to buy your first camcorder. Whatever your reason, this program will explain how you can get more from your camcorder, how you can become more creative in the filmmaking process, and how associated products can enhance any production from the family christening to a commercial project for a client. As with any specialist field, a good knowledge of the subject and its workings is essential if you intend to get more from your hobby. This video is not intended to be a lecture type program. We will of course have to go into some technical details from time to time, but moreover we hope to provide a practical approach to the subject. All video footage is reliant on a storage medium, and this of course is the video tape. It might surprise you just how many tape formats are in existence. By far the most prevalent is of course VHS. This format was introduced by JVC in the late 1970s, and although pitched against the rival Betamax system from Sony, it quickly gained universal acceptance and dominated the consumer market. As the market began to expand, a new demand grew for consumer portable cameras and recorders. Although these were considered fantastic technical feats at the time and were classed as portable, the sheer size and weight of such units would now be considered as something of a joke. With the physical size of VHS tape now limiting the dimensions of the newer camcorders, a need was seen to introduce a compact version of VHS, known as VHS-C. With an adapter, you could replay your footage in your mains VHS deck. In the early 1980s, a new format for camcorders entered the scene, known as Video 8. This new tape format was roughly the size of the established audiocassette tape. It offered a level of performance similar to that of VHS and VHS-C. Its main advantage was another physical reduction in the size of the camcorder, and a new phrase, palmcorder, was introduced into the video language. Nowadays, new technology has boosted the performance still further, with Super VHS and Hi8. These formats use improved tape formulation and record on a higher frequency, and both offer much sharper and cleaner images. Okay, so that's just a quick look at the current popular formats you can see in most high street video stores. Which you choose is largely dependent on what you intend to do with your camcorder, and of course price. Large size VHS and SVHS camcorders can give you a long record time, with up to 4 hours continuous recording on standard play record, long enough for even the most ambitious of school concert or performance. Video 8 and Hi8 can give you 120 minutes continuous recording on standard speed, again long enough for most events. What I will emphasise is that no matter how technically brilliant your camcorder might be, or how many features it might boast, do make sure you use a good quality tape to record on, especially if you intend to record an event for posterity, such as a wedding for example. Do try to spend a little bit more on a high-grade tape. A few pounds extra spent here can pay dividends later on. Well, we've come to Cardiff to visit Chris Evans, who's store manager at Techno. He takes us through some of the features on modern camcorders.
This is a JVC VHS-C format camera. It's the starting range of cameras from JVC. It offers you the basic operation, but it doesn't. It's not overly complicated to use. For instance, it has a fully automatic operating mode. It has autofocus. The operation really is a case of putting the cassette in here, closing the cover down, switching it into camera mode, which is just there, and the recording will be done automatically for you. You have a degree of override controls on the side of the camera here, including a fun facility which is a cinema mode, which will give you a kind of cinemascope effect where the top of the screen, the bottom of the screen is cut to give you a kind of 16 by 9 image. It looks quite good, but I think personally it can be overused, to be honest. For playback control, you have all the playback functions on the top of the camera here. These will give you standard operation as any ordinary VHS video recorder would do. This includes playback, rewind, fast forward, stop. Now, the operation of this camera, as I said, is very basic and straightforward. The specification is quite basic as well. The VHS format on this camera has a standard linear sound track, which gives you good quality sound, but it's not as good as hi-fi sound, and this machine doesn't offer this facility, not at this price range. This is $599. If you want the option of hi-fi stereo sound, you would have to pay £700 or £800 for the same model. That will give you much better sound quality. This is a Sony Video 8 camera. This one is again in the same kind of design as the JVC model, a basic video camera which has basic specification. It's a very straightforward camera, very easy to use. It has very limited controls on the side of the camera. If you have a look at this side, this is the camera section, and you can see that the camera offers you a selection of program overrides, and these are for portraiture and sports photography. Otherwise, you'll notice there is a green dot here. This is the full automatic operation mode. Everything is fully automatic in that mode. The advantage of this camera over the VHS-C format camera in this price range is the sound quality. It has hi-fi sound quality, mono admittedly, but it is hi-fi and it's very clear and crisp. This is the Sharp ViewCam. This is a relatively new model from Sharp. It has an LCD viewfinder. The operation of this camera is different to any other camera on the market. You would actually support the camera like this while filming. Now, as you will see on the back of the camera here, you have the wide angle and telephoto lens buttons here, and the record start and stop button there. So when the camera is being used, you would basically support it like this, pointing the camera in the general direction of the subject. The other advantage of this camera is, as it has a LCD color TV screen, you can play the tape back and view it immediately after you've finished recording. On the side of the camera here, you'll find a loudspeaker, so you can listen to the sound as well. This is an advantage. You can at least make sure that the scenes that you wanted you've recorded and that everything is okay with the tape before you move on. This camera, although it is Super VHS and quite advanced, still has a basic shooting operation. Most of the manufacturers of cameras these days produce cameras with full automatic modes. They have variations on the shooting of the subject by selecting certain program modes, as we've seen on other models so far today. One of the advantages of the camera, of course, is it has an editing facility. There is a new edit socket on the back of the camera. This is the new edit socket that Panasonic have introduced, and this can be used for the connection to an edit controller, either a Panasonic one or, of course, the new computer-based editing systems, computer-based program packages for an Amiga or a PC, and this makes editing much more easier and straightforward. Now, cameras of this size very rarely sell these days unless you're a very keen video photographer. You know, if you want to do weddings and hopefully make a bit of money out of it, then this is the sort of camera that people would expect you to have. This one has a lot of override controls for semi-professional type of photography, including white balance setting. A lot of cameras these days have fully automatic white balance. Well, this one does as well, but you have the ability to override the white balance. Obviously, if you're indoors filming outdoors or vice versa, you need to set the opposite white balance setting. If you have a look at the lens cap, you'll see that it is covered white and it will clip onto the front of the lens hood. Therefore, you can set the white balance without having to hold up a piece of white paper to set it properly. You can just put this on, it will do it for you. Now, if you're looking to buy a video camera like this, you would expect to part with about £1,700. This is not a cheap camera, it's a very, very good quality camera. The camera we've just looked at is a Panasonic MS4, and that had hi-fi stereo sound and super VHS picture quality. Well, from Sony we have this model. This is the Sony TR750, and this camera is again a high-band video camera. It's high-band video 8, so it's high 8 with hi-fi stereo sound. So the picture quality from this camera compared to the picture quality from the previous one is very similar indeed. Again, operation is very straightforward. If I turn the camera around, you'll see that it has a 24 times digital zoom for bringing in distant subjects. It also has a steady shot facility. Now, a lot of the cameras that are very, very small, especially in telephoto mode, are actually very difficult to hold still. So what you need to do is either put on a tripod or a monopod. But on this particular model, we have something called a steady shoot. Now, the steady shoot facility is a facility to cut down camera shake. It works very, very well. It will remove up to 15% of camera shake electronically. And the image has to be seen to be believed. It really does work.
Thanks very much, Chris. The pictures we are currently bringing you have come from the professional SVHS system. You may be interested to know that we have used a JVC KY19 professional ENG type camera docked to a 422 recorder unit. This makes a compact and relatively lightweight camcorder, whose specification is well suited for many commercial applications. Unlike some programs that show a consumer camcorder on location, but film actual shots on a broadcast system, we wanted to show how a shooting format such as SVHS, which is available to all camcorder users, performs in a professional environment. You've bought your camcorder, you've loaded your tape. What next? Well, let's see how a professional production company approaches the task of putting together a program. Well, Ian, would you like to tell us about the program you were involved with?
Certainly, Grim. We were commissioned to produce the official video for the Malvern Hills Classic. Malvern Hills Classic was the world's largest mountain bike event. The event had around 1,500 riders with 10 or 12 key races across an acreage of around 50 square acres. We had to provide a video that was both instructional, informative and entertaining, but it also had to be very, very accurate. We had 7 cameras, including a mud cam.
You've actually mentioned the mud cam there, Ian. Would you like to tell us how difficult it was to get good pictures from that?
Certainly, we had to attach a camera, which measured around 2 inches square, to a mountain bike. The camera had to handle multiple exposure from the differing light intensities around the track and provide a smooth picture. We had to position the bike in a position on the race where it was going to pick up the important riders, the riders which were leading at that stage, and then make sure that we had an uninterrupted signal back to the recorder, which was strapped onto the rear of the rider.
And of course you mentioned the underwater camera.
Well, that's right. We had an underwater camera which was fitted into a large sort of aluminium housing. We used this to film some of the less formal events. There was the bunny hop into a lake and a competition seeing how far riders could jump into a lake. Had to position very brave cameramen in the middle of the lake, trying to position themselves in the middle of the action and catching the rider flying over them, and then also trying to see the rider as they sort of somersaulted into the lake itself.
I'm sure that a great many viewers watching this now with a camcorder can appreciate the moment when possibly they haven't got enough power supply. And I know you've mentioned it was on a 40-acre site in the middle of the countryside. Was power a big problem for you?
Power is a very large problem. We had a central base which had a team of generators to run the main gantry cameras, but trying to provide power to a camera crew that were maybe 600, 800 yards away from base was very, very difficult. We had a constant stream of runners changing power packs over, which were then powered up from our main base. And it also needed very careful planning. Film crews were linked up with radios to make sure that they could be in contact with the base to inform people when they were running out of power. But yes, a constant problem. Just because we're professional doesn't mean we get away from those problems. We just have to be professional in dealing with them.
Such programs take a considerable amount of planning. Don't forget, however, that the approach here to making a program is really not that different to yours with your camcorder. There are numerous products on the market that can help put a professional touch into your next production. Some help with lighting, some help with aspects of sound, and many accessories to aid your filming. It's tempting to go out and buy such accessories, without perhaps thinking through the longer-term consequences of such items. For example, power. With such a dazzling array of batteries and chargers on the market, you might be looking to increase the shooting time available to you whilst you're on location or away from a handy main supply. Most grumbles from camcorder users seem to focus on power, or the lack of it, as you discover that the supply battery with your camcorder runs out of power just at that crucial moment. A good guide towards getting the most from your batteries is to look at the current battery discharges on the market. They can help aid longer running time, as well as prolonging the life of your battery. You can also choose between the belt type models on the market. If you can afford such belts, these can give very long powering times indeed. You might have seen professional electronic news gathering cameras and lights being powered by such belts. Although the voltage on your equipment will be lower than on professional equipment, 6 volts as opposed to 12 volts DC, such belts operate in the same way. Carrying a battery belt, despite its additional weight, is not that noticeable. I have quite happily worked a full shooting day with such belts and have forgotten it's there. Don't forget that the larger battery supplies for your camcorder can alter the feel of the unit with handheld shots, sometimes for the better. A slightly heavier unit can feel more stable and camera shake reduced. With virtually all camcorders, with few exceptions being palm corders and held away from the body with no shoulder support, keeping the shot steady is sometimes to be considered. Due to the physical dimensions of television electronic news gathering equipment, the camcorder has to be shoulder mounted to keep the weight loading as near to the spine as possible. This is hardly a consideration with most domestic camcorders weighing under a kilo. Stability leads us to tripods, and this, as I was told in turn by a film cameraman many years ago, can be a most underrated item of equipment, and yet it has one of the most immediate effects towards program quality. Again, look at the models available. Some offer lightweight design, high reach, quick setup time, fluid effect heads, quick release plates, leveling bowls, spirit level, low level legs. Some are monopods, allowing easy portability with stability. I won't go on. Some tripods have been designed with still photography in mind. Try the head. Does the movement feel smooth when panning? Does it jerk when you start to move the pan bar? Why not try your camcorder on a tripod first? A fluid head would be more desirable if you intend to pan with your camcorder across a countryside scene, such as this one for example. A smooth shot will be more rewarding for just the few pounds more that a good head is likely to cost you. With a tripod, you can start to make a scene work for you. For example, on location with your camcorder, note straight away how these static establishing shots have brought me to the next part of our program, which is just that, all about camera shots. Well, they say that being on location can have its hazards, and we certainly found that out just a minute ago when we heard a massive clap of thunder. Fortunately, the rain hasn't reached us yet, so we better crack on. In this part of the programme, we're going to show you how to frame and compose a shot, how to introduce something to the viewer, and how generally to improve on a scene. Now, we've come here to Monmouth in South Wales, and behind me is the Monnow Bridge, which spans the river. I have with me my trusty tripod, on which we have the camera, so let's kick off straight away before that rain comes. Okay, now what might become immediately apparent to you, besides the background noise, we've got jets and traffic and all manner of unwanted noise coming into the shot, is the fact it might look a little bit underexposed. So what I intend to do is to remedy that immediately. I'll just go in a little bit tighter. Just lock the exposure off now. And that should have improved the shot. Now obviously this is just a static shot again. Useful, as we said before, as an establishing shot. We've just got people milling through it. No traffic. If I just zoom in, I've still got the exposure locked on manual, and I'll pull back just slowly. Now this is introducing the shot to the viewer, as we said before, so we're not quite sure what we're looking at yet. I can just hear a bus coming, so I might just introduce that into the shot as well. Just come through the archway as we start to pull back wide. If you've got a child in the foreground, that's quite nice. I'm quite pleased with that. Obviously, because I'm actually talking as well as working, you need to try and concentrate on what you're trying to get. So, just have one more go. Now there's some archways, pedestrian archways, either side of the main tower. It might be quite nice if I can just wait for somebody to come through there, and again, just show you, end up with a shot like that. Got the railing just in the foreground here. Ah, here comes somebody now, so let's try that. Okay, we'll let them walk into the shot. They're just to the side of the shot, so we pull back now. Probably spotted us. They're going a little bit faster than I would have liked. I wanted to keep them in the shot. But it does demonstrate how you're making people work for you in your shot, so you're introducing another element of interest. Now another useful way is to actually pan. So just check that this, I noticed the sun's coming out, so the exposure might be changing fractionally. So I just pan from right to left. So here we go, there's a car coming through. Use that as my guide. Now it's introduced Mono Bridge. So we've got a static, we've tried to pull back and we've tried to pan. And we can also introduce the pan working up or down. This looks a little bit boring, doesn't it? I'll still give it a go though. So imagine that we've just come into this shot, we're wondering what we're looking at, so we'll start to pan up. And there you go. Of course, the thing is to just study a shot and just see how you can make use of it. Now we're a little bit restricted here in as much as there aren't too many vantage points to get a good shot of the bridge. We could have filmed it square on, but I think the fact that the bridge is sort of curving down the screen here is quite a nice feature. So this isn't a bad angle really, although it's always best if you can just have a recce around it first and just see which is the best angle to shoot from. Well, we're in Agincourt Square now, and we've changed location, and a better setting I cannot think of to demonstrate people shots. We're actually going to set the camera up. It's very noisy, as you can see, but we won't worry too much about the sound level, but I will talk our way through what we intend to do. Right, now we're just going to frame up to start with the street behind me. Right, well, we've got our wide shot, and even though the camera's locked off, there's quite a lot happening in it. And the first thing I'm going to do, which we'll turn to later on in this program, is lock my exposure off. I should be fairly confident now that no matter where I point the camera, such as with a white car for example, it won't affect the exposure setting for the scene. We'll come to this later on. Right, now we've got the wide shot of the square, which I like. I'll come fully wide. As you can see, we've got the posts here coming down to the bottom left-hand side of the screen, and the roofline of the houses. So we've got nice composure on this side of the shot. And it's sort of moving away from us, which is nice. You might have noticed the statue on the right-hand side. Well, that happens to be in the memory of the late Henry Rolls, of Rolls-Royce fame, and this was his hometown. Okay, enough history. Just plan to part of the shot now. Just zoom in and see if we can... Right, this looks promising. There's a gentleman there. What we intend to do is pull back from him. If he was facing the camera, this would be even better. Ah, here we are. Okay, pull back. We've now introduced the scene with somebody. And as we pull back, return to our static scene. Now that wasn't a perfect take, and of course you need to practice to get it right, but I just wanted to demonstrate how you can start the scene and just introduce the viewer to it. Now another mistake which camcorder users sometimes make is when they're following a person like this. We've got some people crossing the foreground, so we probably ruined our shot. Let's try once more. Right. Following somebody, we're leaving room in front of them to walk into. They're actually walking into space in the shot. Now, if we try that again, we'll go the other way, but we don't leave any space. See with that lady there? See, it immediately looks wrong. Can't actually see where she's walking into. These are just common mistakes that are most frequently made. Okay, returning to our static shot once more. This is a live situation. There's a gentleman of the 90s coming through on his mobile. So we know it's busy, and this is quite a nice angle. We're actually looking at eye level though, so what I intend to do now, we'll keep the camera running for this, and I've actually, the exposure's on automatic, because we're going to take the camera off the tripod, wobble wobble, move across the square, and place it down on the ground. A bit of a thud there. Now, just set this up. Depends how we want this to be framed. And also, there we are, someone walking through the shot as well. Just lock the exposure off. I've done that because the auto exposure would have to cope with a lot of different contrasts if we weren't to do so now. Oh, this is nice. We've got white vehicles running through. Just try and keep the camera steady. We're actually, at this moment, I'm actually kneeling on some cobblestones, which isn't that comfortable, but I think the shot makes up for that. And as you can see, just by changing the perspective, it just creates a whole new interest to a scene. Well, we're leaving Monmouth now and visiting Bob Cartwright from AVP, a company which, besides producing copyright-free CDs, is also well known for its multimedia centre. Bob talked about the different types of camcorder user.
Well, there are two types of camcorder owner. There's the first-time purchaser who's bought a camcorder to record family occasions, social events and so on. And there is perhaps the enthusiast who's had their camcorder for some time and really wants to get the best out of it. Now, the fundamental difference between taking a camcorder and shooting something ad hoc and true perfection is really preparation, planning, and the full knowledge of what your equipment is capable of and how to use it. Let's take, for example, the videoing of a young child playing in the garden. The first mistake one naturally makes in your enthusiasm to get some footage is to shoot everything from your everyday eye line. Now, as you can see, this is a boring, monotonous perspective. The framing is random, and you have to remember that the final viewer is not being introduced to the child, or for that matter, do they know where the child is? So, let's get down to the child's eye line and start to see the world from their perspective. Now, just by moving the camera down a couple of feet, we're not dominating the subject, and at the same time, our body position allows us to have steadier shots, which I can assure you the viewer will be much happier about. All at once, the perspective introduces the child and whatever they are interested in. And at this point, her conversation will also bring much more life to the video. Now, sound creates more atmosphere than you think, and by getting your subject, in this case to talk while she's playing, will add much more life to the scene. As an example, now let's take the sound out and see the difference. As a general rule of thumb, the best way to introduce a subject is a couple, 2, 3 or more wide shots, held steadily, and we now see where all the action is taking place. Perhaps after 30 seconds or so of this, stop the camera, move in close, and start running, and this becomes a natural cut. Now, how close you go in is up to you. But in the case of children, every day a little change occurs. And after all, these are your memories we're shooting here. Now, each situation is different. But if you can finish off much in the same way you started with a wide shot, it shows how much time has passed, what else has perhaps changed in the surroundings, and prepares the viewer for the next image, which may be somewhere completely different. Now, one simple rule of perspective and framing is thirds. If you divide this picture horizontally and vertically into thirds and place the subject matter onto one of these invisible lines, the whole composition becomes somehow much more interesting. Now, this can be the same for children in this case, general views, long shots, scenes, really big close-ups, normal close-ups, or any other subject. Now, it is said that the only difference between an amateur and a professional is an amateur thinks he can manage without a tripod, whereas a professional knows he can't manage without a tripod. And they can be a very useful, but also a very cumbersome piece of equipment. So let's take a similar scenario, but this time using a tripod. If you notice, all at once the pictures seem to have an air of quality about them. Now, if we compare this shot to a handheld shot, the movement is affecting your enjoyment of the subject. Whereas back on the tripod, you can really get the feel of what's going on. To maintain the viewer's interest, you still need to move around just as much, just like you did when you were handheld. The fear is, perhaps laziness, if your tripod takes root, you've returned back to this monotonous perspective. Everything is seen from the same place, the same eye line, and all of a sudden, the subject or the video starts to get boring. Now, this allows you to use a telephoto to get in close without attracting the interest of the subject. Now, with children, this is great, but it is even more important when you're shooting adults, perhaps at a social event or a wedding or such, where they're far more camera shy and camera aware, and the final pictures result in a far more balanced and absorbing video, and in many cases much more entertaining. Now, on a practical note, obviously as good as the tripod can make the actual production and your shots, they can be cumbersome and awkward. Certainly perhaps if you're with a family and you're going somewhere and you have to carry this around with you. And perhaps more importantly, with the family around, they're time consuming to set up. So every shot you do, after the first 2 or 3 shots, the family perhaps will be a bit bored with your enthusiasm with the subject. So you have to make a decision whether you're going to do a production and use a tripod as the basis to hold the shots together, or you're going to mix and match. So you have occasional handheld shots when you're really in close and getting into the subject, and then using the tripod to establish where you are, or if you need to use a telephoto without the wobbling, perhaps a sporting event or something similar. Or in some cases, it's not physically possible to use a tripod. So if the children are in the garden or up a tree, you're not going to take a tripod up a tree. So each occasion, you have to make a decision. But this is the difference in the preparation and planning. And knowledge of all these things and how you're actually going to approach what you think you're going to go in video can make all the difference to a really good final result.
Now let's take a look at other shots. Establishing shots and long shots, as seen in this introduction, can quickly give the viewer the necessary information in relation to a scene, and can help to introduce the other shots essential towards a film's production. An establishing shot is just that, usually just long enough to lead us to a mid or close-up shot. Establishing and closing shots can be used to introduce captions and graphics onto. Mid-shots usually impart more immediate information and can show, for example, people talking. It can take us from an establishing shot without the mistake of a jump cut, as the scene will have changed sufficiently to cover up any continuity errors. Next is the close-up, usually used to portray a scene with more immediacy, such as a close-up of people's faces. In this scene, we have used a medium shot of somebody working on a lathe, and then cut to a close-up, and then an extreme close-up of the operator's face. As a rule of thumb, if you intend to film, for example, somebody working, a close-up is a good way of capturing the viewer's interest. Panning, as we've seen earlier, can allow us to show a whole scene that might not necessarily be introduced as well by an establishing shot. Quite often, a pan of a countryside scene can be effective in showing the scale of the shot. Keeping the pan fairly smooth is quite difficult, but if you can work on panning shots, this type of shot is very useful, especially if music is dubbed onto the scene later on. Using the telephoto or zoom end of the lens can not only allow for close-ups of faces, but introduce interest by compressing the content of the scene. With a shot of a street, for example, the traffic and surrounding activity is somehow forced into the frame, giving a very busy feel to the whole scene. Handheld shots, as Bob has just described, give total freedom to the camera person, as well as allowing portability when shooting. They are invaluable when you're in situations when using a tripod might be cumbersome or where the scene is constantly on the move. With handheld shots, you can move the camera along the action to emulate a tracking shot. Whichever style you use, and however you build up your shots in your next production, a golden rule is to ensure they don't run on too long. With 15 years' experience in video, and having produced everything from wedding to broadcast, corporate to educational training films, is Steve Jenkins.
Now, the development of any program is really the development of very basic principles which have evolved really in the broadcast sector over many years, of course. A lot of those were derived from the film industry of the past. But people at an amateur level can understand those basic principles very early on and then begin to build up and develop very sort of coherent, watchable programs. So one of the things really that people should set out to do is to really understand and learn about basic camera principles. Now, a lot of people are impressed by what they see on film particularly, and they want to do all kinds of elaborate camera movements and all the rest of it. But if people can just grasp the basic grammar really of basic shots, and in the early days that can be just wide-angle shots, mid-shots and close-ups, and then begin to see how programs can be developed from that, how they can develop really what I call a sense of visual narrative, visual literacy really. Ways they can do that is really by looking at television programs much more closely and see what the broadcasters actually do. One of the things that television programs does, of course, is that it's constantly changing, in the sense that a shot on screen which lasts anything more than about 5 seconds has to have a great deal of interest within the shot to hold one's attention. So the amateur camcorder user will use the facilities on the camera, especially the zoom, and maybe endlessly panning and zooming at the same time, all of which makes really poor shots, poor television watching. So they have to avoid those kinds of things, and the way that they can do that is by quickly discovering that the red button on the camcorder not only starts the shot, of course, but it can end it as well.
Choose a format you're happy with. Go to an established shop, such as Techno, and get informed advice. Use good quality tapes. Be prepared to spend a little more for high-grade tape, especially filming something you want to value. Power is something you'll eventually notice. A spare battery charging can help you get that vital shot. Look at the option of a tripod. A good tripod can enable you to get the right shots more effectively. Plan your shots. Try a dry run without the tape running. If you're happy with the result, run the tape. It'll save you suffering shots of feet, pavements, sky, etc. Charles Manolescu from Piccadilly Audiovisual Systems.
I think you've got to, you know, having the right camera is half the battle, but having the correct peripherals is extremely important. A good solid tripod is very important. It's no good having a tripod that wobbles and shakes, because your videos will not look professional. It's also important to have a good power supply, either a battery belt or a series of batteries that are reliable and will last a long time. And lighting also is very important. Either a camera-mounted light or a handheld or tripod-mounted light will make a whole stack of difference to the end result.
Okay, well, it may well be take two, as you can see. But sound has an immediate effect upon the feel of a scene. We mocked up the first take in order to illustrate how important good sound can be. And even on a professional shoot, it's surprising how often that sound can hold up production due to extraneous noises from traffic, planes, and wind, etc. Every camcorder has a built-in microphone, and most do a remarkable job of capturing sound. Unfortunately, they sometimes do a remarkable job of capturing the operating sounds from the camcorder itself, such as the zoom motor, the transport mechanism, autofocus, and of course, the operator's breathing. If you look at the dimensions of camcorders today and a physical proximity of the mic to the mechanical workings of the camera, then it's hardly surprising that such sounds are picked up and recorded. Some camcorders have a mic socket on the body, and if you go to any high street electrical store, you will see external mics. These can vary in specification and design, depending on the job they are intended to do. Now let's just briefly take a look at two popular mics. The microphone on the left is omnidirectional. That is to say, it captures sound from all directions equally. And this is usually a good all-purpose microphone, and most supplied mics follow this pickup pattern. The mic on the right is unidirectional. This pickup pattern favours sound pickup from in front of the microphone, and will tend to ignore noise from behind. This type of mic is ideal for telephoto and long-distance sound pickup. A tie mic can be an absolute godsend in many situations, and as you'll in the introduction to this sequence, it can mean the difference between a disastrous soundtrack and a clean, clear one. Make sure that the mic is not covered by clothing, Many tie mics can pick up the rustling noise of jackets, shirts, etc., and keep the cable out of sight. It can become the unwelcome focus of a scene. If you can't use a tie mic, perhaps because the subject is moving, you could consider using a directional mic on a boom. You will need another person to act as boom operator, and you will have to be careful not to get the mic in shot. Don't spend a fortune on a boom. You can get cheap replacement cobweb brush handles, which are made of lightweight metal and can be telescopic too, and just tape the mic to the end. A little ingenuity, some coat hanger wire, insulation tape, and several elastic bands later can give you an effective microphone suspension mount, which should isolate handling noise further. OK, it isn't going to win any technical designer awards, but it's going to be out of shot anyway, and as long as it does its job and saves money, who cares? There are inevitably certain situations where a wired mic would prove to be impractical and possibly even dangerous, such as here, where our subject is fishing in the middle of a river. Or here, at a civic ceremony, where if we were to trail a cable from the mic to our camera, we'd stand a good chance of tripping someone up. I speak from experience. A radio mic can be unobtrusive, easy to set up, and can leave you free to worry about the composition of a shot, rather than the possibility of someone objecting to wires crossing the floor. To illustrate the improvement that an external microphone can make when you next use your camcorder, we've shot this scene using a tie mic on our subject, and also at the same time have taken sound just from the camera mic. The interview has taken place in a large stately home, with our camera placed just 8 foot or so from the person.
Apart from a Friday now, I hardly have
Just
time to
listen
speak
first
anybody.
to the
I'm
onboard
fully
mic.
employed on the protection of the beacon. We're news setting all day Monday, my colleague and I, and Tuesday morning, and then on Tuesday afternoon I
The sound is very flat, dull, and you are aware of the echo from the walls of the large room.
Just down the back of the
Now let's take it down and bring up the tie mic.
Estate about a mile away, and I spend all Tuesday afternoon down there
What a
planning the
difference.
paper, and then all Wednesday
The
afternoon
soundtrack
actually
is suddenly
producing
much
it
more
and
immediate,
pasting up
and we quickly feel much more involved with our subject.
the whole process goes from there. We've just about
It's
got
simple
it
improvements
by
such as
early
this
Thursday morning.
that'll make your next production that much more professional. If you can take on board any of these suggestions, you'll go a long way towards help lift sound from being a poor relation in video. And now, let's take a look at the summary. Especially outdoors, in a non-controlled environment, an external mic is very useful. Directional mics pick up sound forward of the mic, ideal for long-distance work. Omnidirectional mics pick up sound from all directions, a good all-purpose mic. Tie mics can be unobtrusive and get clear, close sound, such as for interviews. In windy conditions, wind gags, as shown earlier, can save your soundtrack. A little ingenuity can go a long way. Try making your own boom mic, therefore allowing the subject to move without the restriction of wires. Experiment, perhaps with a radio mic. Your subject can be placed in more situations whilst reducing the risk to you and others. We may not realise it, but lighting can become a powerful tool in the armoury of video. It is also one of the most difficult yet most exciting parts to learn about in video production. Experiment with lighting and your camcorder, and a whole new world opens up to you. Unlike in the good old days of tube pickup cameras, the chip cameras of today produce amazing colour fidelity pictures in lighting conditions that would once have required a whole battery of lighting. A lot is made of the low light capability of camcorders, especially as a selling point. And with an illumination capability of just a few lux for acceptable pictures, it is sufficient for nearly all shooting situations. If we're in the home, it's true to say that for the most part, many camcorder owners don't give much consideration towards lighting, perhaps because so much of its influence can be dealt with automatically on modern camcorders. We've used these tungsten halogen lights for the interior parts of this programme. Their output is 800 watts, and in the TV industry they're more commonly known, for obvious reasons, as redheads. Their output is fairly constant, and they allow for accurate colour pictures. It's said that good quality lighting never shows, as the addition of film lighting should not be too obvious in a scene, and should be there only in a naturally occurring way. It can be used to add atmosphere to a scene, or just to allow for better quality pictures. Let's use this static scene as an example. This is probably a familiar shot for most photographers, the bowl of fruit. We will introduce differing lighting to show just how powerful a tool lighting can be, and how it can create a differing atmosphere to a shot. Right, this is how the picture looks at the moment. Now we're just relying here on natural light coming in from a window behind the camera. It looks fairly flat, and as you can see the colours don't shine through. Now let's introduce what we call a key light. Right, now a key light is placed just to the side of the camera, and as you can see it's lifted the overall video level. The colour has also improved with this. Now let's introduce, in addition to the key, a soft fill. Right, still further, this has improved the video level. You will notice, however, that as a shot it still looks rather flat. However, by the introduction of a backlight, it suddenly takes on a whole new dimension. It's actually got something resembling depth. Now let's just leave the backlight on and take away the key and fill. Again, we've just created a differing mood just by subtraction of light. Probably a common mistake which people make when using video and using lighting is to always keep the lighting in front of the subject. But as you can see from this shot, we've relied purely on instant light coming in from a window and one backlight. Let's look at our lighting plan. Our camera position is bottom of screen. Just to our right is the key light, giving the strongest illumination. On the left of the camera is our fill light. This introduces, with the aid of a scrim or diffuse cover, a much softer, lower intensity light. Behind our subject and to the top right of screen is our backlight. Quite a narrow beam of light to highlight the subject and give depth to the shot. This lighting plan can be used for many interior shots. Again, let's quickly apply the same lighting plan to our subject. Key light. What a harsh image this is. Now our soft fill. This has taken out the worst of the severity in our picture. Now backlight. Look how the outline on her head is defined. The curtains are also showing relief in their detail too. I've been fortunate enough to have worked with a top film lighting cameraman over the last few years, and what I've always noticed is just how much importance he places upon backlighting, and here you can see why. You don't need expensive lighting to experiment at home with your camcorder. A set of redheads will set you back around £1,000, but for around £20, try this with an Anglepoise lamp. Just by moving it around this figurine, you can apply a great degree of creativity with just 40 watts of light. Let's look now at colour balance. Well, basically, I suppose that colour balance is now something that most camcorder users have very little to worry about. Most current camcorders have indoor and outdoor settings. You will probably have noticed that if, for example, you leave the setting on indoor and then shoot outdoors, the pictures look cold, or a bluey look is evident in the shot. Alternatively, if you shoot indoors with the outdoor setting switched on, then the pictures look very warm, with an orangey cast to them. Some of the more advanced camcorders have a manual setting for such shooting conditions, which, as Chris Evans from Techno has mentioned, allows the camera person to set an accurate white balance for any situation. The conditions under which video cameras film is referred to as having a certain colour temperature. On professional cameras, we have a filter turret that allows us to first set the filter for our shooting location. The differing numbers on the filter wheel are set towards what is known as degrees Kelvin. Outdoors on a cloudy day is set at 5600 Kelvin. Indoors with normal incandescent lighting is around 3200 Kelvin. Interestingly enough, this is also the colour temperature of outdoor light just before sunset. If setting colour balance is a chore when out shooting, then some camcorders have an auto white facility, which continually assesses the light which hits the sensor on the camera and changes the white balance accordingly. Such systems can be fooled, however, by large colour casts, such as from painted buildings, just like the one behind me now, or by the domination of a certain colour in a scene. Again, you might look at onboard camera lights as a useful way of eliminating such errors. They can save the day in certain situations where you have to be mobile and still get good colour pictures. How many times have you seen camcorder footage where as the camera pans across a bright scene, the picture suddenly darkens and the bright scene takes on the appearance of a Hammer House of Horror set? If colour balance and lighting are both now considered as our friends, then that just leaves exposure as an unknown quantity. As with many other camcorder settings, you can leave it on automatic, which is fine, until you find yourself shooting into the light, or something in the shot makes the exposure too high or too low. You can, on some camcorders, set the exposure manually for such scenes. Or you can use the backlight switch for scenes like these.
Well, we haven't got an apparition in red.
Where filming into the light would normally pose problems. And finally, this is how our bridge shot looks with the equivalent of the backlighting switch on, and then without. Whilst we're on exposure, why not try some of the many filters available? They can transform a scene and bring a new level of finish to programs. From ultraviolet to polarizers, soft filters to star filters. They really can put the icing on your production. Well, in the second video, we'll be shooting more footage to produce an edited program. We will also be looking at the different types of editing styles, from pop-type videos to gentle documentary-type programs, and along the way gain tips from the professionals to help us with our next production. I look forward to seeing you then. Welcome to the Welsh border town of Monmouth. In conditions, once we required a whole battery of lighting, and cue the loud noise.
You want me cheerful as well?
Yeah, I'm just conscious of my position all the time, you see. You just tell me if I've disappeared out of shot.
A lot of camcorder. A lot of camcorder. Just give you the space here, I'll get it. Yeah.
9D, I'm shooting. My phone's going. All right. Now, if you remember, we said at the beginning that we wanted to... Although it hasn't quite got the stability of using a tripod, it will allow me to introduce us to some of the that went all wrong. Well, Ian, you've been involved as associate producer. Just say, we've changed our location now. We've actually come to the Welsh market town of Monmouth, which is based on the borders of Wales. I said Welsh and Wales. That's any production, from the family christening to a commercial project for a client. As with any specialist field, and don't forget that shooting and editing can be fun too.